What is the house on C Street?
The house on C Street is one of the ways the family pursues its ministry of reaching out to powerful people and serving them. It's a former convent, registered as a church, so it doesn't pay taxes, at which the family provides housing for anywhere at any given time, 5 to 8 congressmen, usually at below market rate. So there's a bit of an ethical question there. And they also play host to many other congressmen who want to come by for lunch or just to hang out. Christian right leaders can use the house on C Street as a place where they can sit down in private with politicians and talk to them. They'll have prayer sessions. When I spent some time there, they had a calendar prominently displayed on the wall with instructions for daily spiritual war. So on Tuesday, for instance, you are to pray against the demonic stronghold of Buddhism. Wednesday, it's Hinduism that's the problem. Most of the guys who live there are a little more laid back than that, and the family doesn't require any doctrinal, statement of loyalty. You want to live there and be in fellowship with these guys, that's fine. It's soft sell evangelism, not that kind of hard Bible thumping that you see on TV.
When you said that the below market rental rates posed ethical questions, did you mean that because the house is officially called a church and it doesn't have to pay taxes, it can afford to charge cheaper rates, and it's questionable whether it's really a church or not? Is that what you meant?
The whole deal. I mean, registering as a church so as to avoid taxes looks a little sketchy. You have these congressmen who are living in a church, but this is not a church by any recognizable standard. That seems like a tax dodge.
I've read there's a chapel inside.
Well, it's a former convent. It's kind of an interesting building, but it doesn't function as a church. And not only does it function as a church, but you have the leader of the organization, Doug Coe, who's going there. And Doug Coe will speak very openly against church. Doug Coe doesn't like church. He doesn't like that whole idea of Christianity as something that you limit to Sunday mornings. He doesn't like the idea of a church where the churches are, historically, they are about a sort of a bottom-up faith, where everybody has equal access, right? But Doug Coe teaches this very different idea. He says when you read the New Testament, you discover that there are concentric rings of authority, and that there's the masses, and Jesus speaks one way to them, and then there's the disciples, and Jesus speaks one way to them. He says, well, that's true now as well. He says Jesus reveals himself more fully to his chosen. And Coe believes, when he's not using the word chosen casually, they refer to themselves as the new chosen because they believe that the Jews broke their covenant with the God. So the Jews are no longer the chosen people. The family are the new chosen. And they don't operate through churches. So it's a little bit of a dodge there. And then there's also, I think this is a very minor question. I think it's easy to get distracted with the family by ethical quibbles around the edges when there's this big giant question of transparency and openness and democracy. But there's this ethical question of are these guys getting below market housing, and is this should this be registered as a gift, especially given that Christian right leaders are going there to lobby for this cause or that cause, and that there is unofficial lobbying going on in the house.
Although the family is a very secretive group, the thing that's best known about it, although I didn't know about it till reading your book, is that the family or the foundation created the annual National Prayer Breakfast, which is attended by the president, members of Congress, and important people from around the world. Can you give us the short version of how they created it, how and why they created it?
The why first was they wanted an annual ritual of consecration of the United States to Jesus. And they thought if they could install this right at the heart of American civil religion, they would be sort of slowly moving America to becoming this godly nation they wanted to be. So in 1953, working with Billy Graham and Senator Frank Carlson, who was Eisenhower's right-hand man, they went to Ike and they said, we want to do this. They tried with Truman and FDR too and didn't get anywhere. And Ike immediately recognized it for what it was, which was a blatant violation of separation of church and state, didn't want to do it, but he owed Senator Frank Carlson, who was then one of the leaders of the family, he owed him a big favor. He had helped organize an evangelical vote for Eisenhower, and Eisenhower agreed to do it. And the family knew that once they got it rolling, then it becomes a tradition. And so now I've talked to congressmen. You mentioned that you didn't know that the family runs it. Almost nobody does. Your invitation comes on congressional letterhead. I've talked to congressmen who believe that it goes back to the beginning days of the Republic. You can imagine, James Madison rolling over in his grave at the thought of this. It's a pretty bland event on the surface of it. It's supposedly ecumenical, although their planning documents say, this one planning document describes it as anything can happen, even the Quran can be read, but Jesus is there, he is infiltrating the world. Well, this is the ecumenical event, supposedly, that has the sanction of U.S. government and the U.S. president, and also becomes a sort of a week-long lobbying festival for foreign officials. One of the things that bothered me is when I looked at who was coming, the delegations from around the world, almost more often than not, it was led by the defense minister of small nations, Albania, Ecuador, and so on. And they're coming there to lobby. And the family is only too happy to help them do that in exchange for influence in their governments.
Is there anything you'd like to tell us about the Mark Sanford story or the John Ensign story that you feel like you understand because you've studied the family?
I was especially fascinated when Governor Sanford explained his decision not to resign by referring to King David and saying, look, here's King David, this guy who fell mightily, but he went on. And by fell mightily, he means that King David had an adulterous affair and then had the husband of the woman murdered. And that's actually one of the sort of core parables of the family that I encountered and described this experience where David Coe, the son of Doug Coe, the leader, came around and gave us this long lesson. He says, what made King David great? And the men I was with are all trying to say, well, he loved God, all this. He says, no, that's not it. He says, King David was a terrible man. He was an adulterer and a murderer. So why is he a hero of the Bible? And the answer is because God chose him. King David is beyond morality and their limited understanding of Scripture. And that's a central parable in the family's thinking. And I could almost hear Doug Coe's voice when Governor Sanford is saying, I need to keep governing because I'm like King David.
Well, Jeff Sharlet, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you, Terry.
Jeff Sharlet is the author of the book The Family, which was just published in paperback. He also co-edited the new book Believer Beware, First-Person Dispatches from the Margins of Faith, a collection of articles from the website he co-founded, Killing the Buddha.